Hmm. Well, hello, whoever, wherever, whenever you are, why ever you're here. Thank you for showing up. Um, Denise Matteau here. And yeah, I'm going to talk some more about this cult that I believe I'm watching the birthing process of a potentially very destructive and very sinister pseudo Christian cult. I made a video about a week ago entitled, Is Paul Vanderklay Creating a Cult? And um, it, it asks that question. And I, at that point, I was about 90 to 95% sure the answer is yes. In the week since then, yes, 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 yes. And it's worse than I thought. I was tempted to entitle this video, and I still might, Is Chandra Vanderklay Creating a Cult? Chandra Vanderklay is a teacher at a Waldorf school, Rudolf Steiner School. If you know anything about Rudolf Steiner and Waldorf schools, it's absolute New Age anthroposophical religion. The religion is anthroposophy, which I have a hard time with the noun form. The adjectival form is easier. And it's an offshoot of theosophy, which is the 19th century Kabbalistic occult religion, um, founded by people like Helen Blavatsky and other um, occult mystics, some of them anti Christian, um, most of them anti Christian by default, a few of them overtly anti Christian, but in reality, it's simply a mixture of old Middle Eastern pagan philosophies and cults, the Kabbalah, ancient Egyptian, Hermes Trismegistus, and all that stuff. All very interesting stuff. Stuff I've been interested in myself, but it's not my religion. And if that is your religion, fine. But here's where it gets very, very strange. Chandra Vanderklay is the wife of Paul Vanderklay. Paul Vanderklay is the pastor of the Living Stones Church, which is a mainstream Calvinist, old style Protestant church in the Christian Reformed churches of North America, which is a denomination that harkens back to the Pilgrims and the Puritans. Dutch Reformed. Okay, so we're not talking about modern Christian television, Benny Hinn voodoo cults. We're talking about a fairly standard puritanical WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, Dutch Reform, but definitely that heritage, colonial days heritage. It gets very interesting too when you start to look at these people in New England. They're in California, okay? So here's this pastor of that kind of church who's working with another pastor in the Christian Reformed Church of North America, a man named John Van Donk, who is pretty much a closed book. He stays behind the scenes. You don't see too much. He doesn't have a website or a strong internet presence, but he is the actual partner of Paul Vanderklay in so far as the two of them organized a now international system of conferences called the Estuary, which is connected to Jordan Peterson, Jonathan Peugeot, John Vervaeke. Now, those names, Jordan Peterson has masqueraded as a Christian, but he never claimed for any particular denomination. And lately, he's kind of come out of the closet. Is that, he likes to talk about Christian ideas, but he apparently is not a Christian. Apparently, I'll say, because I think it's still up in the air. But at any rate, he was their darling for a while, and everyone knows he was everywhere on the internet. And every single topic had a video of what Jordan Peterson had to say about this particular topic or that particular topic. It was ubiquitous. And it was the result of very skillful group marketing. And then Jordan Peterson kind of imploded. So they were floundering a little bit. And Paul Vanderklay was one of the people in the circle around Peterson. And so he's trying to revive the energy with this thing called estuary movement. And the estuary conferences are where you see the cult start up, because the estuary conferences are being organized by a variety of people who have nothing to do or are not part of the Christian Reformed Church of North America. They're not Calvinist. Some of them aren't even Christian, but most of them are other varieties. There's one guy who doesn't go to church who thinks we need to revive the BLM riots around George Floyd. I mean, total white liberal nutcase politics, violent politics. And he's more into that than he is into anything Christian, but he's Paul Vanderklay's main fundraiser, and fundraising specifically for the Livingstones Church, which is a CRCNA, Christian Reformed Church of North America denomination. And this man who's not part of that church, whose politics are all about street thug type of stuff, and he's he's not an old man, he's a middle-aged man, old enough to know better. One of the guys that might be giving us boomers a bad name lately. And this is what's interesting. Paul Vanderklay is pushing these people who are not part of his religion as his inside circle. Estuary is maintaining a public facade as an ecumenical, multi-Christian oriented discussion zone, a conference area where people can come together and have intellectual discussions. Jonathan Peugeot is, as far as I know, an Orthodox Catholic icon carver who's one of their main speakers, one of their main money makers for their conference. John Vervaeke, the author of The Meaning Crisis, another cognitive philosophy, psychology type of writer who's very popular. He's one of their main speakers at many of their conferences. And of course, those two are associated with Jordan Peterson. And now Paul Vanderklay is organizing these conferences around them, who have nothing to do with Calvinism. In fact, John Vervaeke is as far as I know, he's 100% New Age. And which brings us back around to Rudolf Steiner and Chandra Vanderklay. There's a whole thing in the feminist movement of real subterfuge. I mean, I've run into it over and over again. Radical feminists. And when you get involved with the New Age Rudolf Steiner stuff, you're talking radical. Okay, you're talking, the whole thing. A friend of mine had her daughter in a Waldorf school, and one of the things that the kid she had been transferred into that school. She'd already had a few years of public school, and she was a pretty smart kid. She was my daughter's best friend. They were both the same age. And the Waldorf school in our town was always trying to recruit people, and I was invited to their school evenings when they had recitals and stuff too, and always approached by people wanting me to enroll my child in the school because, of course, it's a lot of money to go there, and I wasn't interested. One of the reasons I wasn't interested was what I was hearing from the little girl who was going there. They were teaching those kids how to see gnomes in the grass because that's a German. Apparently they were focused in this particular Waldorf school, which is in Berkshire County. It's in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. They were focusing heavily on Germanic folklore. I don't know if all of the Waldorf schools are on Germanic. Rudolf Steiner is out of that part of Europe. Um, anyway, it's that, I mean, it's cute stuff, and it can be taught to kids in, as part of fairy tale stuff. But usually when a school includes that kind of thing, it's in storytelling time, art time in the younger grades, and it is clearly presented as pretend fairy tale fantasy. But this little girl was upset because she was taking it as pretend fairy tale fantasy, which was fine with her and with us, her mother and me and everyone else around us. But it was not fine with the teacher. The teacher wanted her to understand that there really are gnomes and she really could see them if she wanted to. So she was feeling some pressure. And my friend, her mother, was complaining to me about it, asking what I thought. And I'm like, I think it's batshit crazy, is what I thought. And then I saw the artwork at one of the recital evenings. And their artwork was so uniform. I have a background. I mean, just raising a child gives you a background. But on top of that, I did study child development in college. I was on track to become a curriculum designer, but I ran afoul of the fact that as a Christian, I I just could see we were on different tracks. It was not going to be the profession for me. Anyway, I know about it. Okay. I know that if you present the artwork of a couple of dozen children in the same age group, even if they're all told to paint the same subject, you are going to see a wide variety of style and presentation. If you see uniform style and uniform presentation, then something's going on. On top of it, you could say, well, maybe they were told they were studying that style. Possible. But the teachers who were proudly showing the parents, presenting these paintings that were all hung on the wall, were going on about the individuality of the kids. And I was listening to the warm and fuzzy sounding sales pitch, and I was looking at the artwork and I was saying, no, 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 that's not what's going on here at all. Total disconnect between what they were saying was going on and what we were looking at. Long story short, my friend decided that, it was the stepfather actually who was paying for that school because the kid was getting into trouble in public school. And like I said, she was a streetwise little kid. And my friend finally convinced the stepfather that no, this was not worth the money. It was not the answer to the problem. And she was allowed to go back to public school. But it was interesting. And it was interesting because I had a lot of encounters with Rudolf Steiner related people in Great Barrington. There was actually an entire, like, it's weird to describe. It was almost like one of those 1950s weird films where you wonder if your neighbor is actually an alien. I mean, it was really weird because they would approach people with questions like, you'd be having small talk with somebody at a coffee shop and say, "Oh, you live here." I was related to people there. I didn't grow up in Great Barrington, but I grew up partly in Berkshire County, and I had a lot of family around there, and I was considered native. And so I was one of the locals. And they would ask questions of these weird locals. And there was a campaign going against our doctors and our veterinarian. And it was a whisper campaign. It was weird because we were just like, what's with these people? They would say, "Oh," and I can't remember the veterinarian's name, but and I don't know why they hated her. Possibly because she was a veterinarian for the farmers, and these people were into the whole weird vegan animal rights stuff. And it's possible also that she was not willing to go campaign at town hall meetings against um, killing stray dogs. I mean, the rule back then was the dog was in the pound for 10 days, and if nobody picked it up, it had to be put down. Um, and then of course, the animal rights people, they want to kill human babies, but not stray dogs. So it's possible that that was their motivation. And of course, their motivation against the doctors was that the doctors were very much, obstetricians were into delivering babies. Pregnant women were encouraged to have the baby. It was considered normal in those days. So these people would come up to you and they'd say, "What do you think of Dr. So and so?" And they'd say it in a whisper. And they're like, "Fine, why? You think there's nothing weird or wrong with Dr. So and so?" I was like, "No, why should there be? What's the problem?" And then they change the subject, which is creepy. It's like, what's if you're so motivated to open a conversation about somebody, then you should be motivated enough to say what it is that's on your mind, right? Anyway, I digress. The point is, a lot of creepiness surrounding this Waldorf crowd in Great Barrington. There was a lot of creepiness in Great Barrington in general, so who could say why? Now, some of the Waldorf stuff I loved. There were some artists who did some kind of motion dance thing called Eurythmics, and there's a lot to do with Waldorf schools teaching the children superstitious things about sound waves. It might have to do with that. But there was also an excellent, excellent writing teacher. My daughter did take writing lessons with this one teacher on her weekends. And oh, she was excellent. Best, you couldn't imagine what those kids could learn, the way they could ride horses after even just one semester with that woman. So there's good stuff to say. But that's just a little bit of background. I'm thinking, okay, so here comes this Paul Vanderklay. I stumble across him in the internet, and at first, I'm not even thinking twice about any of this stuff. At some point, I decided to kind of join the chat, and I liked the community he's gathered around himself. I thought, oh, I'll say hi. Immediately, though, I noticed a troll in the chat from something called the Keck Collective or Cicada 3301, the Truther group around conspiracies and Discordianism, and Rudolf Steiner's group. I like this. Now, when that happened, I really didn't, I just kind of noticed, okay, these trolls are everywhere. And they certainly flock to channels like Paul Vanderklay's, which attract, he has streams going with a lot of young men who talk about interesting things, Christian, philosophical, cultural things. So that is a place where this particular group of trolls would show up. It's not uncommon. Didn't really think twice about it. Then I went over to look at someone that Grimgriz is always promoting. And this is what's interesting. This is a pastor of a WASP Calvinist old style Protestant church whose wife is a teacher in a Rudolf Steiner Waldorf school. And he is always promoting as his almost his lieutenants in organizing estuary conferences and in also the general influence circle of this group called TLC, which is a more um, informal collection of channels of people who just kind of and oh it's this is a funny thing too. I don't know if one of the trolls suggested to Paul that he start calling them the flotilla. But if you've ever read the science fiction novel Snow Crash and you consider what the flotilla is, and Paul Vanderklay has also humorously referred to himself as a cyber pastor because he's into the internet stuff so much. Yeah, we're talking this. I started to think that is he talking about them being the flotilla because of the satanic tradition that and this again we're looking at the Steiner's theosophical stuff. You present what you're doing. You know, if a witch is going to cast a spell, the person who's part of it or receiving it is given something to know so that they cannot, even though they might not understand what's being said to them, they might not realize it has something to do with casting a spell. When the spell is cast, they're like, well, you were told, you knew what you were getting into. And that's kind of a tradition with these people. And I started to wonder if Paul Vanderklay's use of the flotilla, the word flotilla, you have to, if you want to know more about that, we can talk about it. But if you've read the novel Snow Crash, the science fiction novel, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Anyway, one of the other people that Vanderklay promotes is this guy Grim Grizz. And Grim Grizz is a strange little character. And again, everything that happened with him could have been accidental, except that his behavior was not accidental. I was listening to Paul Vanderklay. I had noticed the troll there, but chose to ignore it. I heard about Paul Vanderklay recommend Grim Grizz. I went and looked. Grim Grizz has some really interesting, very theosophical, Rudolf Steiner oriented content in these artistic videos that he makes where he's speaking, but he's got all kinds of visual stuff going on. And he does things with showing a playing card and saying, like, the nine of diamonds means this or that. And then he picks up these Dungeons and Dragons dice with the numbers on them and does gematria with that and all kinds of Kabbalistic stuff. I'll say that's fine. And when he speaks about social issues, this is where it gets interesting. He takes a very strong right wing conservative stand, pro life, everything that sounds fine to me. If I only read a transcript of what he was saying and did not see his subliminal visual messaging, I would think he was just another pro life conservative. Um, but, I'm watching the videos and I'm wondering what is going on here. And he had some clips from Bishop Robert Barron. And I made this is where, what he did was on purpose. There's no excuse for what he did. I was in the chat, was not chatting, but I was watching the chat. I was watching the screen, and then when he was talking about Robert Barron, Bishop Barron, I said, "Oh, Bishop Barron," and I typed in Bishop Barron is Novus Ordo. Grim Grizz immediately threw that up on the screen and was really angry. I don't know why, but it was like, who is this? Who does this person think they are? They don't know what they're talking about. Novus Ordo. What even is Novus Ordo? I never even heard of it. How dare you say something? And I'm thinking to myself, that's weird. And then I typed in, well, if you don't know what it is, why are you upset? I didn't even say anything bad. I didn't even say it as a criticism. I just said, that's Bishop Barron. He is a Novus Ordo Catholic. That is a kind of Catholic. And Grim Grizz, who was angry at me for speaking this way about my own heritage, he types into an AI, what is Bishop Barron? And AI comes back with Bishop Barron is well known as a Novus Ordo bishop. But he also gets some people upset because he says very traditional things, which is one of the things that's interesting about him. He straddles the fence on Novus Ordo and traditional Catholic. And those are two branches. They're not separate. They're within the Latin Rite Catholic Church, what the Protestants call Roman. But they're not. But they don't. People from one group don't like to go to masses done by the other group in some cases, depending on how extreme they are. So Grim Grizz's immediate reaction is to attack. Then the AI tells him he's wrong. So then what does he do? Guys, doesn't know anything about me. He doesn't even know who I am because I'm typing under Good Stuff Ninja, which is a screen name. And it's not even using my face, it's a drawing that's in my avatar. Somehow or other, he suddenly puts up on the screen a thumbnail from a 6-year-old, hard to find video. An old interview that was done when some other members of Grim Grizz's little crowd of people that he also mentioned he was part of. When I went and listened to he gives a good biography of himself in an interview with Benjamin Boyce, Boyce, if you want to look up that channel. Griswold Grimm is the interview. And he talks about how he got into the estuary through trolling Paul Vanderklay. And that was his door in, and Vanderklay decided to invite him on stage as a result of his trolling them, which is interesting. But he also describes himself moving in these circles, which include some real terrorist activity. And the interview clip that he put up concerns some of that terrorist activity. These people in this troll group were LARPing in a channel in 2019 about blowing up oil ports. And interestingly enough, they published some videos and a blog with my name and my face, claiming that I hate the government, which is absolutely not true, claiming that I'm some kind of radical, and naming the TCP Chouanier oil company that had a couple of tanks in Port Neches. Now, they didn't say anything about those tanks in Port Neches, but they published this blog. They put out these videos, and when I saw the videos, which were all about blowing up boats under the harbor bridge here in my city of Corpus Christi, I called the Port Authority. And I said, I need to show you these videos because the guy who's posting them has a lot of Coast Guard. He was sending letters out. Actually, he was sending emails. Before I saw the videos, I was getting emails harassment emails from this guy, which were carbon copied to internal email addresses inside the Coast Guard. And what I used to do was hit reply all and say, look, this guy's a nutcase. Please do something about him. Leave me alone. But then when he did the video, which showed some equipment and spoke about blowing up boats, I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't know what's going on here. But I know this guy's got some kind of bug in his bonnet. He's got some kind of access to Coast Guard internal addresses. So I called Port Authority. Now, another member of that same crowd has been down here in Corpus Christi. They do something called auditing. They harass police with cameras. They're not getting away with it anymore because they're getting arrested. But at that time, they were still being treated like, well, you've got your right to do public recording. And these are the ones who would harass police officers and call themselves auditors. One of them was coming down claiming that they're fighting corruption in the police department, right? Just like Paul Vanderklay claims he's trying to present an ecumenical Christian conference while he's doing this weird stuff. This guy was going to the Naval Air Station, which is a military base here in Corpus Christi. And he was videotaping license plates of cars going on and off, going in and out the gate. So he was getting the data on people who have reason, mostly employees, working at the base. And he was putting it in video, and it was going out to all these radicals, and it was being picked up in the same discords that Grim Gris was in. Now, when the Port Authority came to my house, because they said, oh no, don't send us the link. We're going to go look at it. You're right here. Yeah, I'm down the street from the bridge that they want to blow up. That's why they're using my name. They're trying to, if somebody else that they came across in the internet was living here, they would have used that person's name. So they said, oh, well, we're going to go out and see it there, because they wanted to see who I was. They wanted to look around and see what was going on. And when they came out here, they were looking at the video I was upset about. And they had my phone, so one of them started scrolling through to see what else was in there. And at that moment, one of the police harassers' videos came up. And this cop knew who that was right away. And that was a Coast Guard veteran. At the time, I didn't know he was a Coast Guard veteran. I just knew he was one of the people promoting these videos. And that's why I was watching, what's going on here. That's why I subscribed. I'm going to keep an eye on these people. And the cop got angry. He turned around, Port Authority cop, and demanded to know how I knew this guy, why I knew him, what was going on, da-da-da-da. And I'm like, it's the internet, If you watch one weird video, you get a bunch of others, and you sometimes subscribe to them, which I stupidly did. Yeah. So this was going on like on a Saturday. Sunday afternoon, I just named an oil company that they named in the blog, which was published earlier that week. So within 48 hours of that blog, 2 chemical tanks belonging to that company in a port just north of here up near Houston blew up. And to this day, there's no there is an explanation that there were safety concerns, there had been repeated issues. The guy who had been sending the emails was always harassing military and government agencies that he knows how to do security and safety. And he was on Alex Jones, done up in a uniform as a first responder. More than once, he was a regular guest on Alex Jones, pretending to be a first responder. It was part of Alex Jones's charlatan crap, talking about what you're supposed to do. So this guy's, he's a nutcase. He thinks he needs to run security for military bases and ports. He and his brother actually were involved in 2017, 2 years before, this incident that I'm talking about in Point Neches, they had set up an evacuation, caused an evacuation of the port of Charleston, North Carolina, by calling in hoax bomb threats. And they're still running around loose. And they are a big part of this cult, this little internet gamer cult that Paul Vanderklay is a big part of. Paul Vanderklay is promoting Grim Grizz. Grim Grizz has a whole interview with Benjamin Boyce talking about it. Not talking about Paul Vanderklay, but talking about his own background. And if you understand who he's naming, if you know other things about them, then you see what he's describing. So we are talking terrorism here. We are talking violence. And in fact, while we're on the topic of violence, I can tell you what happened today, here in Corpus Christi. I use the bus. I'm visually impaired. I have blind spots that do not make it safe for me to be driving a car in traffic. I can see well enough to get around walking as long as I'm in familiar territory, and I can see well enough to do my sewing and crafts. But anyway, I use the buses. And at the main bus station, while I was waiting for my connection, there were bomb sniffing dogs everywhere. They had two of them. They were going up and down. And maybe it was just training. There's been a lot of helicopter, an extra amount of helicopter traffic over here. So yeah, we are, we're living in interesting times. And these people have been involved in a lot of this terrorism because they're involved with people like Mark Parker, the guy who wants to revive George Floyd BLM identity riots. In fact, he posted a video that was done by somebody else, and he reposted it in his YouTube, praising this guy for claiming that it would be a good thing to go shoot National Guardsmen in DC. Yeah, go look at Parker's community page. Scroll down till you get to something he posted last week, and you'll see it. So anyway, and Parker is being heavily pushed by Paul Vanderklay as a major fundraiser for, not for the estuary, but for the Living Stones physical bricks and mortar church, which Parker is not part of. He doesn't even belong to that denomination. He has said he doesn't go to church at all, but if he did go to church, it would probably be the Church of Christ, which is a totally different, 100% different denomination. So Paul Vanderklay is compromising innocent people who go to the Living Stones Church in Sacramento who have no clue what he's setting up. None of the people that Paul Vanderklay is promoting are Christian. You've got Parker, who is pretending to be a Christian of some kind, but he's mainly about violent politics. You've got a Unitarian, I don't know his name, and he's not a particularly upsetting person, but a Unitarian who is one of the significant participants in the planning videos. They do a lot of their planning on public video. They call it being transparent. I call it being duplicitous. He's a Unitarian, and he's stepping in as somebody whose butt the Living Stones parishioner congregation are going to have to kiss, because he's one of Paul Vanderklay's go-to guys for organizing these conferences. And they're talking about how these conferences are pulling people into being baptized as Calvinist Christian Reform Church members. So it is, in fact, a denominational recruitment plan. It's not an ecumenical general discussion conference. So you've got those two. You've got Grim Grizz. Grim Grizz not only is part of the Discordian troll network, and openly so, and Paul Vanderklay is promoting him as such, heavily promoting him. But in his interview with Benjamin Boyce, he talks about how he was able to show people that Seth is a god. Seth is a figure in ancient Egyptian lore. It's also, Seth is the mythological figure that one of the founders of the Kek cult, Michael Aquino, an army general who wrote, he was the first army chaplain for an open satanic denomination. He started his own satanic cult called the Temple of Seth. It's the same. I mean, sometimes they spell it with just a T and sometimes with TH, but it's the same figure. And Grim Grizz was talking about how Paul Vanderklay allowed him at an estuary to demonstrate to people that the figure Seth was actually a god. Which now Grizz is doing the Discordian thing of saying, ha, ha, I was showing them that it was just a Netflix thing and they all are taking it as normal and this is what's going on. It's like, that's what Paul Vanderklay is doing. No, maybe it's Chandra Vanderklay. Because if you're part of this New Age cult that does, I mean, our experience in Great Barrington was very clear. The whisper campaigns they ran against our obstetricians for not, this was back in the 1980s, okay? And you couldn't kill live babies like you can today. Abortions had to be done early term. If a woman waited too long, she simply, okay, if you can't raise this child, we'll talk to an adoption agency and have a family ready to take it, which is the decent thing to do for all parties concerned. It's how it used to be done. But the Rudolf Steiner people are right at the spearhead front of the baby killers. Okay. There's a lot of other stuff I could say, but you don't have 25 hours to put here, and I don't have that much memory space on my video device here. So I'm wondering if maybe I should be asking if Chandra Vanderklay is the one who's setting this up. Because an awful lot of it is coming right out of Rudolf Steiner stuff. And oh, really? To top it off, okay, conspiracy people. Because this is funny, because this is one of the things I've been exploring. I do explore a lot of, one of the reasons why I liked the TLC Estuary people was they talk to people like John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot, who talk about symbolic dimensions and cognition, Jungian archetypes, quantum dimensions. One of the things about quantum dimensions is when there are geographic connections between generations of people. That's why you have strong mythology existing in a tribe that hasn't migrated. That's why the anti-human global socialist people are always pushing people to migrate to somewhere else, because it not only disrupts where they send the immigrants, but the immigrants themselves lose connection to their heritage. And it's been going on for hundreds of years. Paul Vanderklay mentioned one of the connections for the estuary movement and his family's role in it. He was talking about Thompson, Connecticut. No, he meant Thomaston. I'm sure he meant the town of Thomaston, Connecticut. Interestingly enough, my mother was born and raised there, and I have a lot of family that have connections there. Like I said, that's neither here nor there, but there was something else in it's in the archetypal energy thing. Why because things become apparent to people, and they don't necessarily notice them unless there's some kind of pre-existing connection. And that can be dangerous because you can falsely misinterpret these connections. But it is interesting that it's there. There was somewhere else I was going with this. But the Vanderklay thing, anyone who watches his streams, there was a stream recently in the Mark Parker thing where they openly talked about the fact that because of the criticism that I've been making, they didn't name me, but criticism that he's received, he's going to sanitize that channel so that they can use it to look Christian. And they're going to put the political stuff in his back pocket channel so that they can divert the radicalization there. It's an infiltration radicalization group. The other thing that they're doing, and then I'm going to close, if you listen to all of the videos, look through Paul Vanderklay's channel, Mark Parker's channel, and then scramble around and look at some of the others, you're pretty much going to see the same thing everywhere. And Paul Vanderklay is so stupid. He bluntly comes out and tells people, have you done your estuary review yet of the recent estuary conference called Midwestuary? And they all have to stand, oh, it was so wonderful. And it's all emotional bonding. And when you talk to some of the other charlatans and liars that are involved with this, there's somebody pretending to be an Orthodox Christian who's not, a guy named Luke Thompson. Sometimes you see absolutely dead eyes on that guy, and it's creepy as all get out. Other times he's just jittery and nervous. But he's also one of the ones that Paul Vanderklay promotes. And again, he's not a Christian Reformed Church member. He's not a Calvinist. He claims to be converting to the Orthodox from some kind of Pentecostal background. Frankly, I think he's an atheist. I know he's a liar. But it's all about connection and relationship. And one of the things these cults do is they pull the men into relationships so that at the point where they say, hey, wait a minute, this crazy lady's niece, she's saying some things that do kind of look like they're going on. And by the way, I did research this and that, and I did find these other videos that prove that what she's saying is true. What's going on? Oh no, they're not going to do that because those are their best pals now. And they've been taking time away from their family, and they've been justifying it to their family. It's 100% cult emotional bonding to prevent critical thinking from kicking in. And now that they've got this strong group of emotionally bonded people, they're evenly openly talking about what's with these people that don't attend our conferences. Are they really part of us? They're already doing the in-group, out-group thing. And Paul Vanderklay is pulling them in to showing up at Living Stones to do some physical renovation work and really bond some more. So basically, he's now bringing outsiders into that little Calvinist church in Sacramento to build some kind of renovation work on their building, which gives a sense of ownership to it. All this time, this fake Christian pastor's got this Rudolf Steiner wife who's a teacher in the Rudolf Steiner system. She isn't just somebody with a bunch of New Age books on the wall, on the shelf, And the thing is about this kind of deception, and there's nothing wrong with exploring all of these philosophies. I've done it myself. I think that sometimes syncretism in religion is not necessarily a bad thing, but when you're doing something undercover, when you're doing something deceptive, and you're using these kinds of tactics, And there's a distinct connection to street violence and political violence. Something very sinister is going on. I'm going to close now. We're almost up to 50 minutes, but in closing, I want you to remember a picture that's in everybody's head. It was all over the news everywhere back in, well, when was the January 6th event there? Was it 2020? Remember the Q shaman? The guy with the Viking horns and the, coonskin hat or whatever? His, I look at what Grim Grizz is doing, and I look at that. Grim Grizz is acting like a QAnon type of guy. He's not speaking QAnon, but he's saying the same things. And one of the things I wondered at the time is how come nobody's asking this question? Most of the MAGA people were posting super Christian stuff continuously, ad nauseum. Wouldn't it have made more sense for there to have been a Bible thumping QAnon person up there? Why an obviously nutcase pagan shaman wannabe? Nobody ever asked that question. I thought it was hilarious. And now I'm looking at what Paul Vanderklay's doing and the way he's trying to entrap people and putting them in these emotional bonding situations where they're already being asked gently and off to one side. It was actually, I think it was the Unitarian in the Mark Parker stream who started saying, well, what's with these people that don't show up to the conferences? And they actually had a little bit of a dialogue where somebody had to point out that, well, sometimes people do have other things to do, and maybe they're sorry they couldn't make it. So they're guilt tripping people who don't spend the time and money to travel to one of their conferences and participate in their weekend love fest. I don't think there is one single destructive cult red flag that hasn't been raised by these people just within a few days. And on that note, this is Denise Matteau. Over, but not out.